This video is sponsored by the piano learning app Skoov. I can't quite believe that the channel has now reached 400,000 people. I just find that absurdly hard to get my head around. Thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed and supported me so far. And in celebration, I'm going to answer some questions that you guys have submitted. What's your favourite song from each decade? So I think my favourite song of the 1930s is Take the A Train by Duke Ellington. A Train was one of the first songs I was introduced to when I first got into jazz, and I just love the infectious energy and excitement of it. And I do think that Duke Ellington is slightly underappreciated, at least here in England, where if you think of big band, you might think of Glenn Miller, but really Duke Ellington is the king of big band swing. For the 1940s, I'd say my favourite track is probably Nature Boy, made famous by Nat King Cole.
There was a boy, a very strange enchanted.
This song's got some really lovely lyrics to it and a really intriguing sense of harmony and atmosphere. And it was actually written by this really elusive character called Eden Arbez, who was sort of a forerunner of the hippie movement. He basically lived in the hills around Los Angeles in the 1940s, living a hippie lifestyle, a nomadic lifestyle. And he wrote this song, and I believe the story goes that he basically went to a Nat King Cole concert and tried to give him the song to perform, and after a few attempts he actually got through to Nat King Cole, and the song became a hit. So really interesting backstory to this song, and a really magical piece of music. For the 1950s, I'd say my favourite track is Pennies from Heaven by Louis Prima. Now this song was actually written in the 1930s and was performed by various other artists before Louis Prima, but Prima's version is just so energetic and you can't help yourself but to dance around and to smile when you listen to it. For the 1960s, it will come as no surprise that I've selected a Beatles song, and that Beatles song is probably my favourite Beatles song, Strawberry Fields Forever. Strawberry Fields Forever. Over the years, I've never really been sure which Beatles song is my favourite, and to be honest, it's always a constant battle between Strawberry Fields and Hey Bulldog. But Strawberry Fields has just such a unique world to it. It's such a unique sound, and you can really get that sense of losing yourself in the music when you listen to that song. For the 70s, my favourite track has to be Riders on the Storm.
Riders on the Storm.
This one was probably the hardest to choose because I think the 70s is my favourite musical era. But The Doors' Riders on the Storm, perfect track, amazing atmosphere, and Ray Manzarek's keyboard playing is a massive influence on my early keyboard playing, so just a classic piece of music. For the 1980s, I went with Once in a Lifetime by Talking. This is another track which is just oozing with character and energy, and there's no other track I can think of that really sounds like this, and it's just such an exhilarating. For the 90s, I'm sure it's no surprise that I've gone with a Radiohead track, and that track is Paranoid Android. Paranoid Android has always ranked as one of my favourite Radiohead songs, and it's just one of those songs that has so much energy, so much dynamic to it, and takes you on a real journey. For the 2000s, or what we call in Britain the noughties, I've also gone with Radiohead, and this time it's Reckoner. I've said before that In Rainbows is my favourite Radiohead album, and on that album there's various tracks that could be my favourite Radiohead song, but I think Reckoner just takes the prize. I just love its different textures, the way that it builds up with the bed of percussion and then the smooth guitar line and then the lovely falsetto vocal over the top. It's just a beautiful piece of music, quite simple but very effective. For the 2010s, my favourite song is The Less I Know The Better by Tame Impala. My favourite thing about Tame Impala's music is it has such a depth to it. It really feels like every frequency has been filled up to the brim and you're really immersed in music, and I think this track really does epitomise that because The guitar riff is just so chunky, the drums are so heavy, the bass is so fat. It's just a very supercharged piece of music. And combined with a catchy riff and a catchy vocal hook, it's just a great piece of music. And finally, the 2020s, the Roaring Twenties. Of course, there's not much to choose from as of yet, but I say my favourite track so far in the 2020s is Kyoto by Phoebe Bridgers. I only really discovered Phoebe Bridgers in the last year, and she's quickly become one of my favourite artists. And her recent album, Punisher, is just a brilliant set of songs. And Kyoto is energetic, it's emotional, and it just sounds really distinctive, and I love it. So that's my favourite song so far in the 2020s. Right, that was a long question. So now for some shorter questions. Here's a very important one. Would you rather fight one piano-sized flute or 100 flute-sized pianos? I think personally, I hate the idea of 100 flute-sized pianos coming after me. It just sounds really creepy. So at least one piano-sized flute is manageable, you know where it is, and it's probably not going to travel that fast, so I could probably outrun it. Why do classical pieces name their songs with the key signature? For example, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. So the main reason is that classical composers will often be very prolific. They'll be writing hundreds of pieces of music across their career. And practically speaking, to come up with unique names for every single piece, particularly considering that most of them will be instrumental, so there won't be any lyrics to draw a name from, it just makes sense to name the pieces after the form they are, the type of arrangement they are, so a nocturne, a concerto, a symphony, and then label it by key to distinguish it from the other pieces of music you've written in that form. And of course, particularly when pieces of music are written for a particular occasion, or they're just very noteworthy, they will pick up another name. So you have Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but that's not necessarily its formal name. Its full title is actually Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 14 in C-sharp minor. And one last thing to bear in mind with this is, even if a piece of classical music says prelude in C major, it doesn't necessarily mean it will stay in C major throughout. It almost definitely will modulate to related keys, but it will probably begin and end in the key that's in the title. If you're interested in learning to play the piano, then you can get started right now with Skoov. Skoov features a wide library of pieces that you can learn to play, ranging from Beethoven to the Beatles to Billy Joel. Use the link below to start your free trial today. Do you ever feel you detract from the magic by unweaving the rainbow of music? I'm thinking particularly when you have studied a piece intently. So I think what they're saying here is, does studying a piece of music, does looking at the theory behind it, take away from the magic of that piece of music? And this is something I thought about a lot over the years, because obviously my channel is all about looking under the hood at pieces of music. But it is true, there is a mystique, a curiosity when you listen to a piece of music and you don't know what goes into it. You don't know what chords they're using. You don't know what the time signature is. And I have to agree in part that when you study a piece of music, you learn its ins and outs. It does lose a bit of that mystique. But that mystique is replaced with a really deep appreciation of what makes that piece of music great. To be honest, there's been times when I've spent 3 weeks listening to Strawberry Fields Forever because I was making a video about Strawberry Fields Forever. And in that time, I only came to love the music more. This question's sort of on the same topic as the previous one. What is your overall opinion on music theory, and how important do you think it is? This is something that comes up a fair amount in my comment section when people think that I'm perhaps over-analysing or over-complicating music by looking at music theory. And I do appreciate that sentiment to a certain extent. I think particularly if you're an amateur musician or like a hobby musician, you're doing music as a hobby, then theory isn't necessary. Theory is going to be helpful for you and you might find it really interesting, but you don't need it. However, if you want to work in music professionally, or at least semi-professionally, then having at least a foundation of music theory, I would say, is more or less essential. There are people who work in the music industry professionally who don't know much about theory, and you always get examples thrown up like Eddie Van Halen, who is obviously a incredibly successful and well-respected musician who didn't really know much music theory. But those people are often the edge cases, particularly because they're writing original music, and therefore they can always stay within their comfort zone. But if you want to be a professional musician and not have your career restrained by your comfort zone, then you need to be able to talk the language. You need to be able to understand music, and to do that you will need at least a basic level of theory. Would you rather meet John Lennon, Paul McCartney or Tom Yorke? This is difficult because John Lennon, of course, would be extra special, as that would require some sort of necromancy. However, I feel like if you sat down with John Lennon or Tom Yorke, you might not actually get much out of them. You might go to all of the effort of meeting this amazing person, and actually they might not be very responsive, because that's kind of their personalities in interviews. Paul McCartney, on the other hand, has often been a very happy interviewee, and you can often get a lot out of him, and he's very merry. So I might actually say Paul McCartney, because I think he'd actually answer some questions. Do you listen to any songs of which lyrics are not in English? If yes, what kind of music is that? One non-English style of music that I like listening to is Scottish Gaelic music, namely Julie Fowlis. I've always been a big lover of folk music, and Julie Fowlis is just very good folk music. And I was originally introduced to her by a Gaelic cover of Blackbird that she did, which is just so beautiful. If you did a dissertation for your degree, what was it on? Funnily enough, my dissertation was actually on how to have a career on YouTube as a musician. To give you some context here, I've wanted to have a YouTube channel for a very long time, since I was about 13 or 14. And over the years, I started various different channels with various different things: musical, non-musical, educational, non-educational. And I never quite got any traction. Then I did a whole bunch of research for my dissertation, including interviewing some successful channels like Walk Off the Earth and Victorious Sponge. And I actually learned a lot by doing that. And at the time, I started the channel doing piano covers, and I actually picked up quite a lot of views quite quickly. I think I got about 100,000 views in my first month. But then at the time, and we're talking about 7 years ago now, the copyright situation on YouTube was actually much worse then as it is now. And I was doing these covers of pop songs on piano, and they were getting taken down within a couple of weeks. And not just taken down, but my channel was getting copyright strikes. And if you get 3 copyright strikes, your channel gets suspended. So it seemed like at the time, doing a YouTube channel based on cover music was just not feasible. So I sort of shelved the idea. And it wasn't until 5 years after I finished my dissertation that I actually tried again with a YouTube channel. And this time, as you can see, it actually worked. What, in your opinion, is the most dissonant musical interval when played together? To get the truly dissonant intervals, you can't stay within 12-tone equal-tempered music. You need to get some microtonality in there. So, for example, a quarter tone, so half of a minor second. That's pretty spicy. Have you ever suffered serious stage fright before performing? If so, how do you deal with it? Because I can't even play in front of my mother without feeling icky inside. So these days I don't really get stage fright, and that is because I've done hours and hours of work on stage. Over the last few years I've had piano residencies and functions every weekend, so I've done my fair share of playing on stage. But I do remember when I first got into music, and I would feel nervous going out onto that stage. I think for me, as long as I'm confident in the piece of music I'm about to play, then I can kind of just take comfort in that and think I'm going to go out there, play the piece of music, and then get off the stage and everything will be fine. And the good thing about playing music versus perhaps doing comedy is even if you play a piece of music really badly, most audiences will still clap at the end, and then you can walk off the stage and no one has to feel particularly awkward. But I do know what you're saying here. I remember when I first got into singing on stage, and I was in a practice room with a couple of my friends, and I wanted to sing them a song that we were planning on doing in my band, and I actually found it kind of hard to start singing in front of them. went to sing and I couldn't. And I remember one of them saying, well, if you can't sing in front of us, how are you going to sing on stage? And I just thought, yeah, you're totally right. I want to perform on stage. I know I can do this. So I just go for it. And I think that's the thing, is just knowing that you can do it and just jump in and go for it. Hi David, I'm 19 years old and I want to be a professional pianist. I feel like it's too late for competitions and I don't know what to do. Do you have any advice for beginners like me? By the way, I love your videos. So you're mentioning competitions there, so I'm guessing that you're thinking more in terms of the classical world of playing piano, where you enter competitions and do recitals. I've never been in that world. I'm very much not a classical pianist. But speaking from my experience as someone who has made a career playing piano, I would argue that it's never too late to start. Being young does help, and being 19, you are still young. I didn't really start playing music full time until I was 20, and even then, I know a lot of musicians older than me who, for their 20s, worked in completely unrelated jobs and then got into music later on. So it's never too late to get into music. Maybe I don't know much about the classical competitions. Maybe they do have age limits, but music in general, as long as you perfect your craft, you advertise yourself, you do some networking, you will be able to forge your career. F7 over C sharp. So that's definitely a chord with a bit of spice to it. The proper name of this chord would be D flat major 9 sharp 5. So even though you described it as F7 over C sharp, we can see we've got the root, the third, the raised fifth, the major 7 and the major 9. And it's a slightly dissonant, unresolved sound with a few different ways that we could resolve it. For example, we could resolve to this G flat over D flat chord, or we could resolve to a B flat minor. That's a slightly more conclusive sounding resolution. There's definitely a few options here with this chord, and it's one of those chords that has a lot of character to it, and I think the listener gets a lot of pleasure from hearing it resolve in different ways. Another big thank you for the support you've given me to get to 400k subscribers. It's just ridiculous. And this channel, as I was saying earlier, has been something that I've dreamed of for a long time, and I'm just amazed every time I sit down to work on these videos that I actually have people out there who are interested in hearing what I have to say. So thank you for your support, and see you in the next video. And thanks as always to everyone who supports me on Patreon, including all of the names you see on screen right now, and Andre Sainz-Diaja, Andy Deacon, Andrew Brown, Andrew Sussman, Austin Barrett, Austin Russell, Bob McKinstry, Brittany Parker, Cameron Allvilla, Colin Aiken, Chris Cabell, Christopher Ryan, David Rivers, Donald Howard, Dr. Darren Wicks, Eleanor Skorchenko, Espen Hansen, Eugene Leroy, FD Hodor, Greg Kabowski, Guillermo Latona, Hamish Brocklebank, Heinrich Kutcher, Hugo Miller, James Kao, J.A. Kokensparger, John Dye, Josh Sanderlin, Justin Vigor, Lee Lauritsen, Mark Ziegenhagen, Max O'Keefe, Melody Composer Squared, Melanie Schonert, Michael Vivian, Nancy Gillard, Nathan Lawrence, Nathaniel Park, Paul Muller, Paul Pazel, Peter Dunphy, Richard Pride, Roger Clay, Sam Lynn, Sean Kennedy, Steve Daly, Stephen Lazaro, Tim Beaker, Toma Aharoni, Trisha Adams, Tim Payne, Victor Levy, Vidad Flowers, Vladimir Kodakov, and Volti.